セガサターンシロ
Thanks everybody for coming. Please feel free to fill up the front seats. We have a lot to move through. If the fire alarm comes back on, I guess I'll just say we're Sega Saturn SHIRO. We love Sega. Yay! No, but yeah, we really love Sega. I'm Saturn Dave.
I'm Trino or Patrick.
I'm Peter.
I'm Ben.
Oh, music died.
Yeah. That was a technical difficulty. What do we have on the end there?
I'm Ben.
And that's Ben. We make up the Sega Saturn SHIRO podcast. We've been doing Saturn Love since 2017 online, and we have a website, SegaSaturnShiro.com. It's just weekly news and updates on Sega Saturn. We're here at PRGE to spread love for Sega in general, so we're over in the Sega Lounge right over there with Adam Korolick, and just creating like a cathedral to Sega for you guys to kind of hang out and relax.
It's like a holy zone. You guys can feel free to pray as well in there. So.
I love these guys very much. These are my Sega and Saturn brothers, so I'm very privileged to be up here with them. They're my favorite people. And today we're talking
Love you
about
too, Dave.
My favorite company, Sega, which we want to keep the Sega love alive. We want to keep people knowledgeable about Sega because, of course, they do games today, but they don't do hardware anymore. And they were so incredibly prolific and innovative during the 1980s and 90s. And they had impact on online console gaming, 3D and virtual reality, ergonomic and analog control, motion control, open world game design, video game ratings, game and system expansion, downloadable content, game subscription service, artificial intelligence, voice recognition, internal system storage, and game development, and that's just scratching the surface.
It's not even close to what this company has accomplished in so these years.
Yeah, and the sad part about this, and the title of this panel is Sega, a company too far ahead of time. And as the cookie crumbles, I guess a lot of their own, the labors and the efforts that they put forth, they weren't able to really benefit from a lot of that. Actually, other folks in the industry would, like 10 or 20 years later, kind of copy or iterate on what they did and knock it out of the park. But Sega, try as they did, they often failed.
They're just a little bit too early. Just the technology connections of the technology was just not there at the time to achieve what they really wanted to,
Exactly.
Whether it be online or something of that nature, just, was not ready yet.
So getting right into it, I'm going to read off a little blurb about each interesting little topic and kick it over to my Shiro bros to kind of give their insight on it. And we're starting with hardware innovations. Sega made a lot of innovations with hardware itself, and we'll start with control. And we're going to start out with the Control Pad 1989. In a world of sharp-edged gamepads with pointy corners that murdered your hands over long play sessions, Sega introduced the Genesis Control Pad, the first ergonomic game controller designed with perfect grip and comfort. With its rounded shape and easy-to-reach buttons, it set the bar for what a good game controller should be. Sega's competitors followed suit, and today comfort and ergonomics are essential to the design of any decent gamepad, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, yeah. I definitely think so. I mean, we're looking at you, Xbox Pro Controller. We beat you to it. But no, but Peter, I know that you for example, are familiar with the, I guess what's called the Nintendo wrist, or the sharp corners using the Master System controllers?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, really, that you don't realize how something is good or innovative until you hold it in your hand. For those of us that grew up holding an NES controller or a Master System controller or even a TurboGrafx controller, those were just like little bricks, right? And it seems like the best thing ever until something like this comes along and just really shows you how much better it can be.
Now what's crazy is, as much as we know the Nintendo and the Master System, before the Master System, or the Mark III out in Japan has an even smaller rectangular controller. It's like a little kid's controller that you're trying to use.
Yeah. And next up, we're gonna talk about more control with motion control. Activator 1993, more than a decade before iToy, Wiimotes, Kinect, or PS Move, Sega unleashed its Activator on a world hungry for motion control. Forget that silly gray glove. Now you can use your own hands and feet to control the action. Unfortunately, it wasn't much more than a glorified control pad with poor infrared sensors and a small handful of supported games. While it was definitely ahead of its time, it wasn't ready for prime time.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I don't know if anyone ever played Power Paradise. It kind of reminds like an early version of that one where you're just like hitting all the buttons. So again, Sega beat it from Bomani, so take that.
I once tried playing Sonic the Hedgehog with that, and I tried to do a roll. No go, no go.
I guess like vaulted ceilings or inconsistent light would affect it. They would kind of refine it into a Dragon Ball Z game in the arcades, but I mean, it's very short-lived. So long ahead of its time, and of course there would be other players in the industry that would make money on motion control, but not Sega. 3D Control Pad 1996, while in development at the same time as Nintendo's own 64 controller. Sega's 3D Control Pad, or Multicon, in Japan took a different approach to analog, opting for frictionless magnetic Hall effect sensors immune to physical wear and tear over time. This is something that's kind of big now,
Yeah, a lot of motion control drift and stuff like that. You all probably know what it's like with that.
It also used an onboard microcontroller with a special algorithm resulting in incredibly precise, like one-to-one analog input. Its multi-use design would lay the groundwork for what would ultimately become the Dreamcast controller. You guys have anything to say about this one?
Love this controller. It feels so good, and we're talking 25 plus years after its release, and it controls beautifully. It's just such a great design. Love it.
And I mean, a lot of folks are like getting Hall effect sensor stick kits, to like change out because they realize that it was actually a pretty good idea, no wear and tear.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about your controller grinding down to a certain bowl and a 64 controller or something like that.
With the visual memory unit in '98, so much more than a simple memory card, the VMU offered a variety of features and functions. Players could share save data, connecting two units together, and when not connected, they gave you numerous pocketable games, virtual pets, a clock, a calendar. Most importantly, the VMU provided a small display right on your gamepad with available info at a glance, something Nintendo would replicate with the GBA link cable and the Wii U tablet.
Yeah, I really like this thing. It's really great for like Resident Evil, like just having your health there, or Madden NFL plays. I mean, honestly, I still think you can't do that even in like recent Madden games. So it's better than the new Madden games. But I mean, they're the same game, so whatever. What about you, Peter? You said you drive to work at one point, or school and work?
Yeah, so when I was going to university, if I ever had lessons that were less than interesting to me, I would whip out my VMU and I would train my little Chow on it, and it was really cool.
For a good 5 minutes.
For the 5 minutes that the batteries would last, for sure, yeah. But I did nerd out on it a lot, and I would load two Chows on two different VMUs, and you could stick them together so they could either fight or mate, whatever, right? And so yeah, it was a good little thing to have, for sure.
Ben, you a VMU fan?
Oh, absolutely. And Pat even touched in on one of the best features that I liked it for was Resident Evil. Your health bar was right there, so you can see exactly how much health you had based on the VMU.
Oh yeah. Motion control again. They haven't given up on motion control, guys. From 1998 to 2000, Sega didn't give up on motion control after the failure of Activator. In fact, they'd work on multiple implementations ranging from the unreleased Air Knights Dreamcast remote to the Sega Bass fishing rod and the Samba de Amigo maracas. Curiously, when you cross the physical design layout of the Air Knights remote with the waggle motion and vibration of the fishing rod and the maraca's sensor bar, you get something that undeniably resembles Wii motion control. Thanks, Sega.
I think we noticed that the controller looks a bit familiar. I don't know if you guys see it as well, but I have no idea.
Yeah, we'd be remiss to not point that out.
Although, I've got a real fun game to play with that fishing controller. You can actually play Soul Calibur and fight with it. It's fantastic.
Unfortunately, the Air Knights, it didn't really hit the market. It wasn't as accurate as it needed to be, and again, too far ahead of time, right? But Nintendo would cash in on that idea. Sega was really big about expansion. They really were keen on offering value to the consumer and extending the life of their consoles, which is something that today we don't care about. We kind of take it for granted, and we give game companies a pass. But back then, people crucified Sega for doing some of this stuff, and I just
look at you, PS5 Pro.
Power Base Converter 1989. Imagine buying a brand new console and being able to play all of your existing games on it as well. Well, this isn't hard to imagine because that's exactly what Sega did. Compatibility with Sega's Master System was a selling point for Genesis and was made possible via the power-based converter. The ability for gamers to play their existing library on new hardware added consumer value, and since has become a standard practice and expectation in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, depending on what console you buy nowadays, some of them are not exactly backwards compatible, unfortunately.
But it was so innovative at the time. Like, that was something that should have been a standard much earlier, but thanks to Sega, you know, the idea was out there, and now we do take things like that for granted.
Yeah, it's easier for parents too when they're trying to get an upgraded console for their kids that want the console, and they have this big, massive collection of games for the previous one. You can justify it to get one of these.
And I mean, like, I love the Nintendo online service, you know, playing all the old games. I can introduce them to my son, you know, and it's fun. So, but Sega started it back with the power-based.
I just hope the Wii 2, the Switch 2 can support the Switch 1 games, though.
Guys, lock-on technology kind of blew my mind when it came out. I mean, I realize that now it's kind of a silly trick, but years before DLC was even a thing, Sega's lock-on technology enabled extended and altered gameplay for Sonic 2 and 3 via the Sonic and Knuckles card. And while perhaps just a clever solution to a missed Sonic 3 deadline, it managed to spark wonder in every gamer who tried it. Sure, it would work with Sonic 3, but how on earth did Sega retroactively enhance Sonic 2, we would think? These days, this sort of thing, like I said, is nothing special, but back then it was technological wizardry.
Because I think, Peter, you mentioned it had support for other games, right?
Yeah, so you plug in any other cartridge outside of Sonic 2 and 3, and then you get a variation of the Collect Blue Spheres special stage from Sonic 3, and so each game would sort of generate a random playfield for you to mess around with. So it was so novel to be able to do that back then. You just felt like the ultimate person for discovering that if you put in Streets of Rage or whatever else, that you'd get something out of it. So it was really, really rad.
It's a shame we didn't get any more lock-on technology games. Imagine like Streets of Rage or Mega Man or just something along those lines. But yeah, DLC in cartridge form.
I mean, speaking of lock-on, they wanted to use that technology more with the Sega Virtual Processor in 1993, while slapping a 3D DSP chip into a game cart wasn't exactly Sega's idea. Nintendo had the Super FX. They did come up with a clever plan to use the lock-on technology to create a base cart that would enhance standard games and effectively lower the cost of production and cost to consumers. But despite having several games planned, only the proof of concept Virtual Racer was ever released to store shelves, and it was a whopping $100. So you kind of can tell why. The technology wasn't there in order to be able to produce it at a low enough cost.
Yeah, and while it was really cool, it still suffered the same Star Fox effect of low frame rate and not really the best game you want to, the optimal way you want to experience virtual racing.
But you know, back then, low frame rate was better than no frame rate because this was all new, right? So still very mind-blowing.
Yeah, so with Virtua Racing, you really want the 32X version of the deluxe Virtua Racing. This Genesis version is really hard to play if you sit down and try it, but it's worth giving it a whirl just because of how unique it is.
Another, Sega just way too far. I really gotta say, I usually don't defend 32X, but it dawned on me that Genesis came out in 89. And in the 94, they released the 32X. And these days, we think nothing of, mid-generation console updates, right? The 32X is one innovation that probably never should have happened, but however, it did supercharge the hell out of the Genesis, adding 3D gameplay and even some enhanced 2D performance. These days, it's normal for the big three to pump out mid-gen updates, even supporting multiple systems simultaneously without being crucified by consumers. But this did not work for Sega. Consumers at the time were reluctant to invest in a stopgap measure to prolong Genesis shelf life.
And keep in mind, this came out the same year the Saturn was released in Japan. I think it's the same day as well, right, or something
Yeah,
crazy.
simultaneous release.
So it's like, why not just wait for it? But I mean, it's a really good Knuckles Chaotix machine. So if you ever want to just glue that in, you're good to go.
Please Sega, please port Knuckles Chaotix.
Yes, exactly. Let's get that.
I mean, you look at the new Nintendo 3DS. People bought that just so they could play those games, right? Same situation. You'd have to buy a 32X to play 32X games.
Well, this one had more games than this new Switch, though. I
The
think it's like 3
difference
games.
is about 20 years, basically.
Yeah.
That's really what made it.
See, I've always believed that the 32X could have succeeded with Sega if they had made that slot in the back of the Saturn a 32X port. So that way what you have is the cartridge games where people could upgrade and go from the Sega Genesis to the 32X cartridges. and then plug them into the Saturn, and then on the Saturn CD side, you have the CD discs.
And you know, sorry, I'm having a brain fart. So extended RAM. Sega actually beat Nintendo and their red extended RAM block for the 64. Sega always strived to bring the arcade into the living room, and their end goal was for home video games to achieve one-to-one parity with their arcade counterparts. This was a tall order considering arcade boards cost several thousand to make versus a couple hundred, but this did not stop Sega. With slick programming and the use of extended RAM cards, Sega Saturn was able to bring home many of Capcom and SNK's fighters with nearly all frames of animation intact.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows some of these games just look beautiful. I mean, 03 is like almost one-to-one to the arcade machine. It's beautiful. Or Alpha 3 if you're in the US, so I love it.
Yeah, and if you were a Saturn fan, like while it was at retail, it was a tough sell to convince someone that it's a better console, better experience than the PlayStation. But this was one area where you could really see the Saturn completely outshine the PlayStation when you had comparisons of 2D conversions, right, from the arcade. The Saturn, especially with those cards, was able to just really beat the PlayStation hands down.
Absolutely. Moving right along, we're gonna. And yes, of course, there was also the VF3 expansion. Now that was a bridge too far. I think they really wanted to bring VF3 onto the Saturn, and they did work on it a little bit behind the scenes. But we really never saw anything of it other than rumors in trade publications. You know, folks calling it like the 64X. But again, too far ahead of its time, not really affordable to produce at any kind of cost that would have made sense. And of course, the Saturn was failing by this time in the West, so yeah.
I'm sure people wanted to buy another 32X. I'm sure people did.
Well, next up, we are going to one more thing.
One more thing.
one more thing that was way too ahead. Okay, we can't even really call Nomad an innovation, I think. You know, it's not like it was the first 16-bit handheld. That was Atari's Lynx, and it wasn't the first home console to go portable. That was NEC's Turbo Express, but it did manage to put a massive and popular mainstream 16-bit home console library in the palm of your hands during that console's active life on the market. Imagine real console gaming on the go. Today we call that Nintendo Switch. In '95 we called it a miracle.
Yeah, and I think this was only released in America too, because like I think that it was not successful in Japan as much, so they just really marketed the Nomad in America. Is that correct? I think.
Yeah. In Australia.
In Australia, yeah.
Yeah, this thing is a brick. Have you
It's a
guys ever
cheap-
like held this thing before?
Go to the Sega
You can,
Lounge.
yeah.
If you go to the Sega Lounge, check it out.
Yeah, we got one over there. It's funny because it's a brick that you're holding, and you got the power pack that mounts to the back, and then you got a Genesis cartridge in the top, and you're like, okay, yeah, we can do this. But
Just make a pair of nunchucks out of it.
Bring your Jinkos. That's the only way to talk.
Yeah.
But it works. It works.
It's coming back though.
You know, Sega must have thought, wouldn't it be great if you could just save your game directly to the console out of the box? Because that's exactly what they did, and we think they were onto something as it's standard practice today. However, it wasn't until the 7th generation that internal storage became the norm, and even then memory cards stuck around on the Xbox 360. So while PlayStation may have sold for less, Sega offered more value with a pack-in game and internal saves right out of the box with Saturn.
It's amazing. I love it. As long as the battery doesn't die out, of course.
Right.
But in all honesty, like really, that internal memory was enough to hold save files for all the launch games as well as some that came after. So again, you know, you didn't have to buy a separate memory unit like you did with Sony's machine. It was all there. So Sega was really kind of creating the Saturn, anyways, as a gamer's machine.
But as much as Dave knows about like Saturn stuff, he didn't know about the save state initially.
That's true. I didn't. I thought, oh well, you know, I'll just get a memory card later. I'll save my game. I'll just play without saving. And then when it asked me, do you want to save your game? I'm like, yes. But I mean, I didn't expect anything to happen. It saved my game, and I was like, oh my god, there's like internal saves. It can't be overstated how shocking that was back then. Now it's like, take it for granted. But yeah, it was crazy.
Exactly.
And of course, Dreamcast VGA.
Yes.
With HD TVs rolling out at the end of '98 in the US, consumers became aware of the move toward image clarity and high resolution. So when Sega's Dreamcast debuted with native VGA support via the optional adapter, it was the closest thing to high-def gaming that anyone had seen up to that point. The sharpness and clarity of this progressive scan image was practically alien to consumer eyes accustomed to interlaced video and broadcast signals.
Yes, now this is an amazing thing that's even supported today with HDMI boxes. Like progressive is like the best sort of medium to be at. Like it just looks so good compared to everything else. And putting on like a CRT, like a PC CRT with 480p, it's a BVM killer. It's a PVM killer almost. It looks just as good, if not better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it really, like, it helped these Dreamcast games hold up visually. Like, I mean, we're in 2024, and some of the better Dreamcast games still look really, really good this day. So, yeah.
Yeah, when you walked into like the EB or the Funko or whatever, and you saw this hooked up to VGA for the first time, it was like nothing you've ever seen. Crazy. Next, we're going to talk about innovation and immersion. One thing Sega really loved to do is try to create the most immersive experience they possibly could, and this started in the arcade. But again, they would try to bring that home, constantly trying to bring the arcade home. That's why I would see things like the Activator, and we see things like motion control, because they're trying to make their games immersive. But again, the history of Sega, doing like the full body or Tycon experience in the arcade, they had these sit-down cabs that they would kind of pioneer in the 80s. 1985 to present, starting with the release of Hang On, Sega's amusement division would establish their Tycon game genre, or full body experience, which they would continue to refine and improve over the next several years with games like Space Harrier, Afterburner, Outrun, Thunderblade, GP Rider, Galaxy Force 2, R360, and Sega's behemoth AS1, as well as numerous others. This trend caught on with rivals, this trend would catch on with rivals, Namco and Midway, yet Sega's quality and innovation always set them apart.
And these are just amazing, amazing experiences. Like, imagine just going, just like running around playing like full simulators. It's just like enhancement. These things are in like Sega World, these giant like motion simulators. It's insane.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a scene in the Terminator 2 movie where John Connor is playing at an arcade and he's using one of those full motion. I think it's Afterburner that he's playing, right? And he's kind of like swinging up and down and around. And it was a thing then. It was really, really cool.
Do you remember playing any of the ride-on cabs, Ben?
Oh, absolutely. My favorite one was actually one that came a little later, was Virtua Racing in the arcades.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fantastic. And then, of course, some of the earlier ones were with the motion controls were just amazing. They were so much fun to play.
I think you even have new ones, like there's an initial D cab that has the AE86 as a whole entire cab, like a motion thing. So if you guys want to be to Kumi, head to Japan.
Next, we're going to talk about three-dimensional gameplay, and it really started with Sega's Super Scalers. You guys might be familiar with the Super Scalers. In 1985, Sega led the industry in 3D gameplay with its Super Scaler games capable of scrolling, scaling, and rotating both background and character sprites at blistering speeds. These games used third-person 3D perspective, ideal for racing, flight, and shooting simulations, and were often paired with one of Sega's immersive Tycon cabinets, creating several must-play arcade experiences considered timeless classics. Sega's Super Scalers also led to further innovation in 3D gameplay.
Yeah, these things are just amazing. Like, I mean, they have Star Fox and all this, but I mean, I'd rather play something like this. It's fast motion, going fast, and sort of just tricks you into thinking that it is 3D. When in reality, it's just like a 2D game. It's just like it's the tricked and stuff like that. It looks amazing.
You know the style when you see this too. It's always Sega that does these style of games that are out there, like Afterburner. And they're very unique and they've got that tone that you just know.
Yeah, and they even had a lot of this on Genesis as well. I know Panorama Con is one of my favorite one of those. Absolutely love like that scaling type of game.
And the frame rate, they always like prioritize blistering frame rate too. That was the thing with Sega. And they would continue on with games like Virtua Racing. Sega's VR Virtua Racing in '92 was a revelation to arcade goers. It wasn't like we had never seen 3D polygons before. You had the games like Stun Runner and Hard Driving, right? But that's kind of what it felt like when witnessing the speed and fluidity of this Model 1 powered racer in action for the first time. This was 16:9 wide vision display and 4 prominently advertised VR modes, both arcade firsts. Racers found themselves in control of the 3D camera view and behind the wheel of an immersive F1 experience like no other.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the 16:9 screen. Just amazingly huge, and it's CRT too, and it's really
a 16:9 CRT.
I mean, you don't get that until the BVM late 2000s, early 2000s era.
Yeah, I really wish a lot of you guys, I'm 43, and I wish you guys were around when it was coming out, because I was a kid back then, and it was very different, very interesting and exciting to see these kind of games like Virtua Racing come out, because the polygon graphics was something we just hadn't seen before. It was always these sprites and stuff like that, and so this was just way light years ahead of everything else.
Yeah, like the frame rate, the VR modes, the widescreen, the ride-on cab. It's like put all that together, and it was an incredibly immersive experience. You also had Virtua Fighter in '93. After Virtua Racing, Sega kicked it up a notch with the release of Virtua Fighter, the first 3D polygonal fighter and perhaps one of the most influential games of all time. Sega designed the template for what a 3D fighter should be, and everyone else followed suit. It demonstrated 3D human character models effectively and helped popularize 3D polygon graphics, sending huge ripples across the game industry and disrupting what was then a well-established 2D gaming landscape, for better or worse, honestly.
For sure, like, I mean, it's definitely taken out the competition for sure with that game.
Yeah, but it also, it kind of like was a turning point at which, you know, companies wanted to go 3D, full 3D, you know, and it was like they weren't interested in 2D anymore.
Yeah, and 2D was really saturating the market at the time. Like every fighter out there was 2D, and it was typically hand-drawn sprites, typically, not always. You know, lots of like fireballs and weirdo special effects, whereas this came in from the angle of being like a realistic fighting game. So not only was the 3D visual, you know, much more realistic than hand-drawn cells, but the martial arts that the characters in Virtua Fighter you know, used were based on actual real martial arts, which was also quite unique. So it was a big game.
And the first time we ever saw, like, you know, humans in polygonal form, you know, that actually moved, like, with fluidity. Next, you know, in terms of immersion, we're going to talk about stereo 3D and virtual reality. Now, this is something that Sega hammered home, like, constantly. They would try, and they would fail, and they would try, and they would fail. It took them forever to give up, honestly, and it all started really with Sub-Rock 3D. Sub-Rock 3D in 1982, Sega had its sights on bringing true 3D experience to arcades all the way back in '82, and they did it with Sub-Rock 3D, the first commercial video game ever capable of producing a stereoscopic 3D image. The player took command of the submarine periscope, which sent a different image to each eye via a special active 3D shutter that developed in partnership with Matsushita Panasonic. This served as a landmark beginning in the race to 3D VR, and that would inform their 3D glasses on the Master System in 1987. The Sega 3D glasses, aka Sega Scope, sought to bring home the active 3D shutter technology from Sub-Rock 3D. Sega's fresh Atari employee acquisition Mark Cerny would both pitch the idea and lead its development after being inspired by Disney's 3D film Captain EO starring Michael Jackson. I guess it all started with that.
Yeah, Sega always comes back to Michael Jackson every single time.
The glasses were made specifically for the use with Sega's Master System, and you can try them over there in the Sega Lounge.
Yeah, they're fantastic. If you haven't tried these before, go give it a whirl. We have it hooked up to a shooter gun game, and compare this to Duck Hunt. See what you think.
Just don't stare at the CRT without the glasses on, or else you're gonna get a little bit of a dizzying effect on it.
Pretty crazy. However, only a handful of games were really supported, and after they were released. So yeah, kind of a bomb, you know, at least from a commercial standpoint.
You look really cool with it on, though. I swear.
So cool, so cool.
Though the 3D glasses sold somewhat poorly and were discontinued, Sega wouldn't stop there. They knew 3D VR was the future, and they would partner with a new startup, Ono Sendai, to bring Sega VR to the 16-bit Genesis, boasting 360-degree head tracking on the Genesis, okay? It received plenty of coverage in the media and promotional materials, but it faced numerous technical challenges and some serious safety liability concerns. So it also ultimately languished in development and was quietly canceled. They even say that, like, if a developing child, put these on for like more than 30 minutes, it would permanently damage the muscles in their eyes and make them do the Steve Buscemi, you know?
Yeah, it's a Steve Buscemi making machine, so.
Yes.
I mean, eat your heart out, Oculus, is all I can say.
Yeah, maybe it's good some things kind of stayed on the drawing board and never made a commercial, you know, release.
I mean, they say the Virtua Boy was bad for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, these really would.
Did you? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the Virtual Boy might cause a headache, but these would like permanently damage you. But Sega didn't stop there. Even that didn't stop Sega. They were determined that 3D VR was the future, so doing away with outside partnerships, they put their own internal man, peripheral designer Kenji Tosaki, on the job. Tosaki would work on the Virtual Visor, a virtual and augmented reality headset compatible with Sega Saturn. In late '94, Tom Kalinske expressed confidence that a Saturn headset would be released for less than $225, but by late '96, claimed that it was still a long way off. alas, it was never released.
Probably for the best, it probably was also pretty awful.
I mean, again, could the Saturn push augmented reality? Could the Saturn push 3D VR?
My PC can barely do that right now.
Yeah, so I mean, good point, right? I mean, here we are even today, and VR is a big thing, but I mean, you need a really powerful rig to not like vomit all over the place.
But it had 3D glasses.
Right. But even a blind squirrel gets a nut every once in a while, and while Sega would fumble on VR on the home front, their arcade amusement division would have better luck. AM4 would partner with established UK firm Virtuality to produce the Mega Visor display for use in Sega's VR1 indoor theme park rides, and Cyber Troopers Network Mercenary for its NetMerc arcade system. While 3D VR has come so far in the decades since these really crude efforts, I guess, Sega still stands as a pioneer and innovator in VR, laying much fundamental groundwork.
So as the mirror, you look progressively stupider as these go on. Maybe it's just me. I wouldn't want to be looking at the bats like, no, mom, no, get out. I'm busy.
You make a great point, Pat. As you look at these, they go from looking kind of, realistic, kind of stylish, to like being like, yeah, this is what it actually has to look like if you want it to work well. Like it needs to be, it's like this big honking thing on your face right there.
Terminator to Cyclops.
Yeah. That's more like RoboCop, maybe.
Yeah, Robocop visor.
But I mean, kudos to Sega for trying over a decade to make this work. Next up is network communication. This is something that the company was like kind of founded on. Isao Okawa, he with CRI or CSK Research Institute, he always wanted network communications to be a core feature of Sega consoles for gamers to be able to communicate with each other, play with each other over the internet, and that was like seeing the future far off. Now. This isn't really an internet network thing, but I want to talk about it because it is wireless. Decades before screen mirroring and wireless video transmission, Sega produced the Telecom Pack, a peripheral that would connect to the Mark III or Master System and transmit video from the console to the television over the air with the included UHF receiver. Despite being a concept way ahead of its time, it suffered from frequency interference that resulted in degraded video quality and was ultimately never released in the West. Still, it represents Sega's spirit of risk-taking and innovation.
Well, I mean, there's also another reason why it was released in the West is that because it's violating FCC regulation existing. I don't know if anybody watched Out of the Archive, but he did like a bunny thing where you can transmit your VCR throughout the house, and it was really banned from the FCC because you can't really wirelessly transmit over like a UHF frequency, so it's technically illegal in the States as well.
Yeah, don't aim this thing at your cat.
Yeah.
It almost looks like an old school radar unit of some kind, right? You can see it kind of spinning.
Yeah.
That's what they use today, actually, for when the cops get you on the freeways.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that like Nintendo might think about, but it's the thing that Sega would be like, oh yeah, we're gonna release
We'll
that.
do that.
Green light. And then of course it would flop massively. Mega Modem in 1990, Sega was incredibly ambitious in their attempt to bring a downloadable game library and peer-to-peer online console gaming with live voice chat in 1999. I'm 10 years too late. 1990, let's say that again. 1990, voice chat and peer-to-peer online play. There have been prior game download services with other nascent consoles, and the Famicom had its online banking, but Sega wanted real gameplay between two online opponents, and they partnered with Sunsoft to make it happen. However, it received criticism for its slow connection and was ultimately never released in the West.
And it's like a microphone, right?
Yeah, there's like a microphone right on there.
I can imagine the fun conversations you can have after you beat your opponents. Xbox, it's like Xbox original voice chat on. It's just even worse.
I believe Norman Caruso did a really good video on this. Highly recommend. The video game historian. Let's see. We also had the Sega Game Gear tuner. Well, I wouldn't call the Game Gear itself an innovative first in gaming, being more of a refinement of the color portables that came before it. But its TV tuner was kind of a big deal because way before streaming video or even video cartridge packs, you could watch live TV on the go on your Game Gear handheld. And portable TVs were still new at that time. So to kids, this was a miracle. Today, streaming video on your Switch or gaming tablet may be no big deal, but in 1990, it was the future.
It was the future. And the thing is that while the first really portable TV term would be the Seiko Watch. This one you can actually like watch and not be, no pun intended, watch it and actually be able to see it without a bunch of scrambled, blurry LED mess. It was actually watchable, even though it's not really watchable.
Did any of you guys
Anymore.
have this?
No, I had a friend of mine who had one. He brought it to school, and we thought he was the coolest person for having this thing. And it was actually pretty neat. Yeah.
Show of hands, anybody have one of these? Nice.
Yeah.
You guys were the cool kids.
Yeah, unfortunately it doesn't work now because analog TV is dead, so.
Right.
You can't watch Baywatch anymore.
I mean, you pick up the pirate ones, but that's a different story.
But the Sega Channel in '94, while only dabbling in mini game downloads for Mega Modem, Sega went all in on Sega Channel, a cable-based subscription service that allowed members to browse from several complete retail and limited release games, all from the comfort of their couch in 1994. It saw worldwide release and had over 400 documented unique games across regions. Before GameTap, Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, or Nintendo Online, we had Sega Channel, and it really was the future.
And I think it's actually back too, right? Like you can actually play it again by
resurrecting.
mod it, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's resurrected in a way, but it's like a glorified flashcard. Have you guys ever got a subscription to it?
I've seen the videos. Like I really want one. They've basically taken like a bunch of the archived dumps of the Sega Channel and somehow put it onto a ROM cart and then inserted that in the old shell, you know, and there you go. It's like the Sega Channel and your Sega Channel experience, I guess I should say.
I just want it for the Tower of Power.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah. But I mean, yeah. So you had Game Pass all the way back then. It was incredible. Then in 5 minutes. Okay, we're gonna cut this short. We'll probably end with network gaming. You know,
Okay.
X-Band NetLink. X-Band was revolutionary peer-to-peer. Catapult. It was like a third-party thing, and we're enjoying it today still.
Yeah, you can still play it online right now. Like we have tournaments going on right now that you can play the Sega Saturn online with people.
And
It's
the
pretty
Genesis.
insane.
Yeah, folks are even playing the Genesis online.
Yeah, this is so wild. Like this was, you couldn't do this anywhere else really on a console at that time. So being able to play Sega Rally or Virtual On against somebody, you know, in the neighborhood or across the country, you know, completely unheard of. And again, because it used phone lines, for those that still have a traditional phone line, this still works today. So it's really, really wild.
Call up your friends and whoop this button with Virtual On.
You know, since we're running out of time and I kind of went way overboard with this, I'm just going to show you kind of like how much more innovation Sega had. They had the Pluto, which was like an online all-in-one. It's over there. Adam Koralik brought it to the
You
Sega
can play it
Lounge.
too.
You can play it. Check it out. It's awesome. You had, we're just running through here. You had PlanetWeb browsing on your consoles in 1996 and 2001 on the Dreamcast. You had, of course, a cross-platform game server, which may even impressive today when they get it going right. But I mean, you had Saturn and PC in '97 with Dragon's Dream. Of course, in Japan only because they get everything.
Look at all the good stuff.
You had the first console MMORPG with Phantasy Star Online,
Absolutely.
DLC, downloadable missions and stuff. You know, killer app for Dreamcast.
Get on broadband. Let's go play some PSO, guys.
You had video chat on Visual Park with the Dream Eye camera in 2000. That's before iToy, PlayStation Eye, Live Vision camera. We had it back in 2000.
Totally not used for
Nobody
bad
bought
stuff.
it. Way
Just
too
one
ahead of its,
game.
too expensive and too far ahead of its time. And on the software development front, you had Sega Technical Institute, basically an educational like exchange program. Not just sending a dude to Japan to help or vice versa, but sending employees overseas to learn the language and study the development techniques. Of course, they bungled the work visas, and the rest is history. You had a video game rating system in '93, you know, and that kind of gave birth to the ESRB that we use today. Sega landed in hot water with the Congress for that. Military defense partnerships.
Thank you, Military Industrial Complex. Thank you, Lockheed Martin, for all the cool stuff. I'm sure nothing bad afterwards happened.
I can see now we would never have gotten to this. You had embedded CE, you know, of course, the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 with Linux and stuff, but they had Windows CE embedded in the Dreamcast. And in the world of game design, you had things like open 3D, open world gaming, you know, and day-night cycles. These weren't necessarily new things. I mean, there's always going to be like a, well, actually, but I mean, this really helped push it in console gaming and in the 3D space. Only two more. We had the dynamic sound of games like Knights and Rez, where you really controlled the sound by playing the game. So it became like this synesthesia where your senses kind of cross over, and add a trans vibrator, and you gotta get
No comment, Dave.
And then of course, and then finally, AI and voice recognition, 96 to 2001, always looking to the future. Sega spent considerable research and development on AI and voice recognition in console games before they kind of got out of the hardware
Yeah,
games.
does it mean we need to bring back Chow? Can we get some Chow back? Come on, Sega. There we go. We got some Chow fans.
to the first movie coming.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just scratch the surface. That's not even everything, and we don't really probably have time for questions, but we can always answer questions over in the Sega Lounge. Is that right? Do we have any time for questions, or are we pretty much done? If we do, we're overtime. Yep. Okay. So then we're more than happy to take questions next door in the Sega
Yep, we'll be in the
Lounge.
Sega Lounge, so thank you
Thanks,
very much.
guys.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Go Sega!
Saturn NetLink